Hello, everyone. My name is Deb Jenny, and I'm the president of the Friends of the Mining and Rollo Jameson Museums. I want to welcome you here today for our annual meeting and program. For our program this evening, we are pleased to present the third in a series of 3 talks hosted by the museums this fall by James B. Hibbard on the topic of both enslaved and free Black people in Platteville. The title of the talk tonight is Black Lead Miners in Platteville, the story of William Maxwell. This topic, which explores our local and national history with respect to slavery, also touches on addressing the individual and collective experience of racism. Recognizing the sensitivity and importance of this subject matter, we want to express that the views and opinions expressed in this talk are those of the speaker and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any organization or agency. Please verify your own facts and views. And now, before we begin the program, I want to invite you to participate in a question and answer period following James Hibbard's talk. Because we're a large group, I ask that I invite you to type out your questions as they come to mind during the program and use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. And at the end, James Hibbard will answer your questions in the order they've been received. I'm now pleased to introduce tonight's speaker. James B. Hibbard earned his Master of Library Science with an emphasis on archival studies at Indiana University, Bloomington. He has been the university archivist at the University of Wisconsin-Platteville since the year 2000. An avid researcher, he has presented his research at history conferences, including several Wisconsin Historical Society local history and historic preservation conferences. In addition, he has published 2 books on the histories of Platteville and Lancaster. His articles have appeared in the Wisconsin Magazine of History, Atlanta Historical Journal, and other periodicals. Please join me in welcoming James Hibbard.
Thank you all for coming. This is the 3rd installment, and it's my pleasure to present another one. At least I have a few people here tonight, so I can look at them versus just no one there. But let's have some fun, okay? This one is an interesting one about William Maxwell. I hope you find it interesting. First of all, I want to talk about Platteville in 1840, the early 1840s here, and how it was. Platteville at the time was very vibrant, very, very moving. It was booming, so to speak. Thank you. And it was the first newspaper was established, the Northern Badger, in 1840. A painter came in 1841. That sort of indicates that the settlement was happening, because let's face it, a portrait painter is not going to show up unless he can make some money. And Platteville itself, I like to show that it had the original mines sort of dictated where the roads went. And then in 1835, John H. Roundtree went ahead and platted it. And like I say, it's sort of like a checkerboard superimposed onto a crazy quilt. That's why even to this day, you cannot drive straight through Platteville. It was not a planned town, it just happened. And that will play a little role. I'll show you about that. One of the things that's sort of interesting about the story of Platteville at this time is from 1840, during the early 1840s, in 1840 you had 8 Blacks who lived with basically the Mitchells and the Roundtrees. And then within 2 years, it doubled up to 17 Blacks. And if you think about it, you have to ask, why did that happen? And I believe there's a reason for this. And William Maxwell and John Roundtree are part of that reason. We're getting to that. But I want you to have that question in your mind and see why that happened. One of the things I want to discuss real quickly here, because this one's a much quicker presentation. Mining itself was you had 2 basic types of lead mining. You had sheet or lead deposits, I should say. You had sheet lead deposits and you had crevice lead deposits. The sheet was much more, you had to virtually blast it away to get to the lead, whereas the crevice was a little more open or whatever, from what I've read. And once you got to it, you'd have your gobs of lead there, and you could dig it out. So in terms of lead mining, if you were lead mining, believe me, you wanted crevice over sheet because it's a little easier to get to instead of blasting. This is illustration on the right there is typically, that's Dale Owens' 1839 report, and it shows a lead mine, sort of lead mining operation. The thing I like to point out, to me, it's a little bit fanciful in the sense that I've been into a few lead mines, and this one looks like practically a pool hall down there. And believe me, it's very claustrophobic when you're down there. They didn't sit there and dig it out so that you could virtually stand in it. Everyone I've been into at that time period, you had to virtually duck your head. But that's where lead mining, this will come into play, the crevice mining, as we go forward. One of the things, the way the lead mining worked at this time is, to give you quickly, people would come in, the U.S. War Department ran it out of the Ordnance Bureau in most cases here, from about 1822 to 1835, they ran it. And after 35, they still controlled it, but it sort of fell apart. And this is just a case of, we have these Galena permits in the archives. And what the Galena permits are is the person, anyway, in this case, Thomas Killian and Archibald Harris went down to Galena, and they registered so they could lead mine. You had to get permission to lead mine. And in this case, it was pretty nifty, because I was able to find where in May of 1828, Thomas Killian takes out his Galena permit. And in that same month, I found this document of him where he basically sublet some lead mining plot there in New Diggings area here in what is now Lafayette County. So that's what that document is. And at the same time, you could see from the newspaper account there, the U.S. Lead Mine Office, they ran the show. I mean, you had to get permission and all this. In this case, here's Thomas C. Legate. He's the captain of artillery and superintendent of U.S. lead mines. And he was running the show at that time. And there's just a Roundtree smelting receipt, 1834. There's several of them. And he, again, as a smelter, he would have gotten permission from Thomas or whoever was in charge of whoever the superintendent. You didn't just smelt, you had to get permission. So the whole thing was run by them. And then as time moved on, by 1835, mid-30s onward, that whole system started to fall apart. The government wasn't making as much money. If I'm not mistaken, they got like 10% share in each mine and whatnot, or how much smelted, but it wasn't adding up. They were losing money. And gradually over this time, people started to do their own thing. And so what happened is you had lead leases. And here's a lead lease in 1845, but there are earlier ones. And at the same time, so the landowner in this case would lease the lead, or lease his land to a lead miner, and then he would actually put an ad in the paper, as you can see there, caution, and that's 1840 ad there, and they're cautioning the people, don't go on my land because I will sue you without permission. So this was it was a game. You can find the lawsuits and all that. It's wonderful to research these days. And then at the same time, lead mining itself was very dangerous. In this case, this death of Franklin Scales, I came across him in December of 1841. He thought he felt threatened by a few other miners or something. He goes to his lead mine. He went with it. He loaded his pistol. He goes there, and the other miners never show up to carry out their threat or whatever. But his pistol drops, hits the floor or whatever, and explodes. He had it overloaded, and it exploded, and a piece of it hit him in the head, and he died. So it was very dangerous profession. At the same time, there was also, you always hear about the lead rush coming to here, but at the same time, there were lead rushes within this area. And this is 1845 account, but in 1839, Whig diggings will come in real briefly at the end, and I'll talk about it. But in 1839, these couple, James Gillis and Timothy Carrington, came along. They found some lead out at Whig diggings, which is west of Platteville here, and they bought up the land. And then in 1840, they opened up the lead miners, and within a few days, 200 miners were out there, plus grocery people and all sorts of, virtually a town grew up there. Here's a photograph of that general area. It's just nice farmland. It's County B and Whig Road, basically. And it's just nice rolling farmland. You'd never guess that 200 miners were out there. But the same time, this piece of ground sort of looks like it may have been a lead mining thing, so I took a photograph of it. So that's how lead mining was developing. And as I'm researching this, I came across this a few years ago. I came across this one article in September 1843, Grant County Herald. And it was written by James Goodhue. And it's a long article, that's just a brief part of it. And he goes on and on and on. And as he goes on, at the end of it, he put down this list of all the mines and stuff and who discovered them. And as you're reading down there, you see, I've typed it out here, it says Black Bills. That caught my attention. And the length of the mine would be 10 chains with 3 and then depth 16. And when discovered, 1841. Muck clay, yes, that do means ditto. And then quantity of ore was 7,000 pounds by 1843 when this article was printed. So they have this Black Bills lead mine going on. I'm wondering, okay, who is this? Could we figure out who this gentleman is? And I have, while I ran across that, my archival assistant came along, and she mentioned, James, have you seen this one book and this one thing of, it's this geological survey report, 1862. And I said no, and she showed it to me, and they said, here's this thing called the Negro Range. Negro R, the R stands for range in this case. And I thought, what the heck is this? And so I looked through the book, you know, and at this time, it came out in 1862, but they had asked John Roundtree around 1859-60. He knew all about these various lead ranges and what they had produced. And by that time, Roundtree had mentioned it had produced 50,000 pounds of lead. And it was called, it was described, there's a Negro crevice commences at so-and-so, how many change and all this. It's through that way I was able to determine where this was. And then here's the account. And if you look on the right, if you look there, you see Black Bills again, and they're taking that right from the 1862 book here, is taking that from the 1843 article, because it's exact listing of what's in the 43 article. So given that, and you see the Negro crevice commences from that, I was able to determine where it was. It took a while, you know, it's like anything. And so I calculated out one of the things, if you look at the map in the upper left, it says again, Negro Range and then Robinson's Range. The town of Platteville there is just put there. That has no relationship other than Platteville at that time was completely in the northwest quarter of section 15. Other than that, that map has, that plat map of Platteville has no relationship to those mines, as you see. So I calculated it out, and I figured out that it was actually, if you look at the map on the right, it's basically at Main and Hickory, goes for 660 feet. That's 10 chains long. Starts at Washington and goes to about where Bradford is today, thereabouts. Just to give you a sense of where you are, most people know, but there's also they call the black or the red square. And then I've put Robinson's Range there is where Pine Street. And Platteville in 1842 ended right there where the blue line is, roughly just a little beyond Chestnut. So this area where they were lead mining, there's nothing there. And so that's where Platteville ended. But one of the things, department heads is requesting remote control of your screen. There's something here, Eric. Approve? Okay, absolutely. Sorry about that, folks. Anyway, so where their lead mining is outside of basically where we think of Platteville today. And then you take that map, I went to the 1868 on the left there, and at 1868, right there, the crosses, those stood for lead mines. And there are the 3 crosses, or several crosses, and that's where this lead mine was. Once I saw that and knew where it was, then I went to, of course, the deeds and whatnot, and the property tax rolls, and that's John Roundtree's property. Once I knew it was on John Roundtree's property, I knew there's a connection here, more than likely. One of the things before we leave, just as trivia, you always read about how Platteville's roads, as I mentioned, were the initial ones were designed to go from the lead mines. If you look, Williams, or in this case, it turns out to be Williams, goes exactly where Main Street, it goes at the same angle. And of course, Robinson's goes at the same angle at Pine Street. So here's positive proof that that old theory is right. So anyway, I knew this is Roundtrees land. So once you Roundtrees, then you go to his ledger and stuff. And with Roundtrees Ledger, he's got in 1837, just at the same time that everyone else is doing it, Roundtree came up with his lease. And his lease is basically what others did, but I'll go through it real quickly. Basically, you would, of course, you'd get permission from him to look for lead on his land. Then if you found any, then you'd go back to him and get permission to get a lease to actually lead mine. And he got 25% of whatever you mined. And then the person who discovered the lead had to employ 2 other miners. And the miners must work the diggings 3 days in each week. And then he described the boundaries that you were able to mine. What he's doing here, which is what all these leases did, they're making sure that you didn't come along and just go ahead and lease a bunch of spots and not mine. They wanted you to mine it. So if you weren't there for that 3 entire days each week, he could say it's null and void. Or if you didn't give them 25% or what have you. So, and then you had to hire 2 other lead miners. So you had to be serious about what you're doing. Here's Roundtree's public notice. Typical notice, this is the land I own, please stay off it unless you have permission. And that's 1845. So there's his lead lease. And William Maxwell would have taken one of those lead leases out from Roundtree on his land, just like Robinson would have. Once you got that, then I thought to myself, okay, let's still try to figure out who this Black Bill is. And I thought I do research in two primary ways. One is I call it contextual research, where I research whatever it is very broadly and narrow it down, and I will research it to the point where I understand that person's personality and whatever, so I can zone in on it. Just like in the first presentation I mentioned, where James Mitchell had mentioned the 2 enslaved girls that he had in the court case. I figured that out because I figured that he'd be arrogant enough to do that, and he did. The other way is through I call it targeted. I targeted those court cases, and I figured it out. It looks like a needle in a haystack, but it isn't. In this case, I looked at it, okay, where would this person, Black Bill, what would he have done in Platteville in 1840 or 41, thereabouts? And I looked, and we have this Morrison store in the archives, and I looked through it, and there's the first entry, July 10th, 1840. It lists William Negro, and he's number 70. That's important, because what these early store owners would do is they would sign each person a number, a unique number. So this person's always going to be number 70. And then I went through looking for number 70s, and bam, 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 just pops. William Maxwell. What it is here, this is the first time William entered the store, bought, in this case, a pair of pants and a bar of soap. And he buys that, and after that, and the clerk obviously didn't know his last name at that time, but from then on out, he knew his last name. He always wrote down William Maxwell. And that was, 2 weeks later that he comes back into the store. And he dropped there 30 separate incidences. In any case, so I knew, okay, this nails Black Bill, he's William. Out of at that time, I should say, the 1840 census lists just 3 black males in Platteville. Henry Christopher, who lived with Samuel Mitchell. James Mitchell just had the 2 enslaved girls. And John Roundtree had Felix, that slave, he was a boy at the time, but he's probably free at this time. And then some unnamed black male, age 10 to 24. And that has to be William. He's the only one. He's the only other black male in town at that time. And during the time the census was taken, so it worked out pretty good. And then if you look at the census, there he is. You have Felix, Rachel, and William Maxwell. And then I went to the who was William? You know, can we develop his story a little bit? I went to the 1842 census and I found him. There he is, William Maxwell. He's heads a household. He's one, so he's not married. And there are 5 free black males in that household. In other words, William has hired 4 other black males to help him with this. Again, satisfying that he had to hire at least 2 lead miners for every, to satisfy the lease agreements. And at the same time, I'll show you real briefly. It's fascinating when you go through William and his and anyone's purchases. I mean, it's amazing. There's all sorts of people I've researched through this ledger, but in any case, William here, he buys in September 3rd, 1840, he buys a flannel shirt for $2, and then in August 30th, he buys a dress coat for $25. Now, I went online and I figured out that $25 of 1840 money is worth $748 today. So that shows you that dress coat was expensive. Not all of us are going out spending $750 on a coat. And then, so he's doing good at lead mining. And then even on Christmas Day, he buys calico, and he buys several things along the way where a lady's hose. He either is buying it perhaps for Rachel, whom he lives in the household with her, or perhaps he had a girlfriend somewhere. I have no idea, but he's buying some feminine items, ladies' shoes and so forth. This is sort of fascinating. It sort of fills out his life a little bit. And then he goes on in 1842, I actually found a case of William Maxwell versus James Anderson. And this was where James had loaned James some money. He asked for $21. James didn't have it apparently, so he takes him to court. And he wins $18.50 and $18.50. And the interesting thing about it is as you break down who he had to pay and stuff, $13 to John Bevins, a doctor in this case, $5.50 to George Lake and his attorney, and then $7.67.5 for court costs, came out to $26.17.5. And so basically he ended up paying up everyone, but he won his case. That would be the first case that I'm aware of where a black person actually won a case in Grant County. Paul Jones had sued in 1839-40 against George W. Jones, but he lost his case. And the interesting thing is, in this case, Maxwell's attorney was George W. Lake, and this again pops a red flag for me. Who was George W. Lake? He's George Washington Lake, and he was born in Maine and all that. He studies law in Maine and Missouri, and he finally comes up to Platteville in 1841, October, and he at the suggestion of Elihu Washburn out of Galena. And then the 1840s and 50s, he becomes Roundtrees' primary attorney, which is fascinating. And then he's elected a senator and the U.S. district attorney, that kind of stuff. But in 1854, he goes to Milwaukee, and that's the case when Joshua Glover, he was a former, or he was an enslaved person, unfortunately, but he had gone up to Milwaukee. He lived in that general area, and the slave catchers had come up and grabbed him and incarcerated him, and they were going to take him back south. And Lakin defended the person. There was a John Rycraft who helped. He's one of a couple men who helped Joshua Glover escape. And Lakin ends up defending him basically on the higher law. In any case, Glover ends up basically getting his freedom, going off to Canada, thank goodness. And then, but anyway, Lakin dies in Milwaukee. But he stayed in this general area. Trivia-wise, I wanted to show you this. This is pretty fascinating. 1850, when Lakin is still in Platteville, we have one of two telegraphs. At that time, the telegraph ran for about 8 months or something like that here. And he's being telegraphed in Platteville. This is the earliest telegraph message we have for this area, which is pretty fascinating. So anyway, that's George Washington Lake, and he becomes basically a prominent anti-slavery lawyer. And again, he's connected with Roundtree. And then if you go to Platteville's Black community, getting back to that initial question, okay, why did it increase? Why did it double in a couple of years? And it's James Anderson, because James Anderson is the person actually who William Maxwell sued. He comes in. I suspect he knew Maxwell as well. If you look at his 1842 census, he's 2 heads of household. That indicates he's married. That's him and his wife. And then if you go over here to the free males of color, it's 4. He had obviously 3 other lead mining men with him, and he had 1 female, which would be his wife. So he's in Platteville, and I figured out through a lot of research that both Anderson and Maxwell both lived in the general where the police department is in Platteville today. And that's where I've got it circled, that roughly that area. It's hard, you can't get much closer. And there's Blackville's lead range off to the left there. In any case, when you look at the census, it's interesting. You have in 1840, because 8 African Americans, as we say, and then 1842 you have 17. Not only do you have 17, you have the original 3 families, Roundtree, Mitchell, and Mitchell, who have some, but you have 2 new families, independent families, not living with others. William Maxwell with 5 males, and of course James Anderson, which so you have these people coming in, and I suspect, just a guess. Oops, sorry about that. I suspect that because William was able to lead mine up here, and Roundtree did it, and at least enable them to lease his land and that kind of stuff, that word traveled back. Anderson came up, so it's very possible that because Roundtree, sorry about that, for some reason it's moving, because Roundtree leased the land and obviously supported him in at least leasing to him, that it enabled others to come, at least feel welcome enough to come, and the population increased. And then what happened to William Maxwell, I wish I could tell you, folks. Maybe someday I'll find it, but he disappears. He's not in the 1846 census, 47 territorial census, nor 50 census. And he may turn up someday. Let's hope he does. But my guess is, just a guess, is that he may have died during the winter of 1843-44. That was when they had a big smallpox epidemic. 25 people in Platteville died. 200 were affected. And that would indicate, that would be the same time frame that Roundtree buries this other person. You have 2 graves in his cemetery. You have the W and you have the R. I can't swear in the Bible, but I do believe that the R is Rachel and the W is probably William. And it's again, to me, it indicates it was a very personal, respectful act of Roundtree and loving, in my opinion, of him burying them there. And so it's better than not putting them back on the back 40. But anyway, it's possible that that's what happened to William. That's the best I can figure out at the moment. But something may come up in the future. Now, real quickly, because I gotta keep moving here. Mark Foreman, this gentleman would have been in Platteville as well. He comes up here in 1846. He was owned by William Foreman of Marion County, Missouri. He comes up into Iowa County, and William manumits him for $1. And then William goes ahead and William he just sort of disappears. He might have gone back to Missouri or whatever. But Mark stays up here for a while, and he that's the cover up in the upper right of his manumission. He moves over to what is Harrison Township, and when he goes to Harrison Township, he goes. It's March of 1851. By the time he goes up to the Grant County Courthouse, and he files his free paper here. Why did he do that then? Because if you think about it, 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act was enacted, and the Fugitive Slave Act basically said, if you were a black person and you didn't have your free paper on you, someone could just take you back to slavery. It's a simplistic view of it, but that's what they could do. It's a scary time for African Americans. Really, it's just sad. And anyway, so he goes up there and makes sure Grant County also knows he's a free man. That's what he's doing here in March of 1851. And then I figured out through the census, here he is in the 1850 census. He's living with Thomas Williams, lead miner stuff, and he's Mark Foreman. Here he is at the bottom. He's 43, male, black, born in Kentucky, and he's living there and probably lead mining. Wig diggings, he's out there. Again, that's a fascinating story. I've drawn you a map here so it gives you an idea. Here's County B, which of course continues on, and then Wig Road where the church is, and then Wig and Stumptown Road. And basically where I've got that oval, that's roughly where the Wig diggings was, and they would have been working it. And here's the 1862 version of it. So he's out there working that thing. He stays there till sometime in the 1850s, and he moves off to Galena. And when he's in Galena, he's a laborer, and then he disappears. Hopefully I'll be able to track him down further. Maybe he died and was buried in Galena. I don't know, but that's where Mark Foreman ends up. It's fascinating. He would have been in Platteville on every now and then, buying things at stores and whatnot in the 1850s and stuff. But he is smart enough. He went up to Grant County and registered his free paper. I don't blame the guy. I want to thank you for listening. I went through this as fast as I could because we have a meeting here, and that's just what it is. But I want to thank you for listening. It's been a joy and a pleasure to present this. And I want to thank also Eric and the whole museum staff here for hosting this. It's a wonderful thing. I can't say enough. This museum, let me give it a plug here. This museum is fantastic. Please support it. And they didn't pay me to say that. So thanks for listening. Have a good day.
Do we want to ask for any questions?
Absolutely. If you have any questions, please type away.
Okay, there don't seem to be any questions at this time, so we'll have to take it away.
Okay. Thanks a lot, folks.
Oh, actually, here
One.
Gene Tesdall asks on slide 2, you state that at first 8 blacks lived with Roundtrees and Mitchells. It bears noting that many of those who lived with Mitchell and Roundtree were illegally enslaved.
Mm-hmm.
Why not use this opportunity to make the point that slavery was illegal in Wisconsin since 1787? Isn't illegal chattel slavery and Platteville part of the story of William Mitchell as the free black lead miner in Platteville?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Absolutely. The way it was, it was sort of like let's say the marijuana debate today. It's not equivalent by any means, but legally, you had the Northwest Ordinance 1787 absolutely said slavery was illegal, which was obviously a good thing. And but then you had the state of Illinois that came in, and the state of Illinois, it was illegal, but they had laws on the books that made it legal. So it was, at least for a few years, and that's why they were able to buy and sell at that time statewide. It doesn't mean it was legal nationally by any means whatsoever, but unfortunately, it was sort of like the marijuana debate today. We have on the federal statutes, you can't smoke marijuana, but on the state level, you can these days. So go figure. But that's where it was. I couldn't agree more with you, Gene. Thank you for the question. Anything else? I think that's it. Thanks so much, folks.
Thanks everybody so much for your time and for your support. Have a good night, everybody. Enjoy.